Hello, good evening to everyone. Welcome to this online event, Discovering the Circular Nature of COVID-19. It's part of a digital talks. Tonight we have with us Ilaria Capua, the director of One Health Center of the University of Florida, in conversation with Dr. Reyes Tirado, the scientist at Greenpeace Science Unit, at the laboratories of the University of Exeter. Ilaria will be presenting her new book, Circular Health. It's available on the major online bookstore, Amazon and whatever is your favorite online bookstore. You can order, of course, in English as well, and also for Italian listener, there is also the Italian edition available. The title of the book is Circular Health, Empowering the One Health Revolution. It's edited by Editore. It was published initially last year and finally available in English as well this year. We'll be discovering this concept of circular health because today we have to look to our world, to our way of our well-being in a different way. We until today we probably isolated the issues in silos. We always haven't think about single problems. Well, as you will be discovering today, we have to look in a new systemic, holistic way in order how to solve the many issues we are dealing, not just the COVID-19, of course, but environmental issue, social issue. So I will actually leave the floor to Ilaria Capua to introduce and present her books. She will be using a PowerPoint presentation, and I leave the floor to Ilaria Capua. Thank you so much, please.
Thank you. Thank you to Emanuele Bompan. Thank you to Reyes Tirado, who reached out to me a few months ago in the midst of the COVID-19, I would say, panic. And we had a discussion about what we can do and how we can work together for this to be a better place after COVID-19. And so thank you for being here, and thank you to Elastica for organizing this. I have put up some slides. Can you see my slides? Yes. Okay, good. So I will give a little bit of introduction and of perspective on what this book is about. This book is about understanding whether it is time for us to redefine health, to rethink the concept of health. Because health has evolved as a concept over many, many years, thousands of years. And in 2,500 years, we have passed from a situation in which we had no data. We had a lot of imagination. We didn't even have a starting point on how our body worked or how the environment functioned around us, the solar system. We didn't really, Homo sapiens didn't really have an idea. But today we are in the world of very, very big data, and we have some enormous challenges in front of us. And some of these, I think, we need to really explore and think about as we rethink about the concept of health. So let me move to my next slide. You can see the slides well. Yes, Emanuele, can you nod, please? I can't see you. Yes.
Yes. Good. Yes, we can see it.
So when you want to redesign something, you have to see what already exists. And so together with Sara Agnelli, who is a classics graduate who works in my center, we did some historical research and came up with this drawing, which of course isn't ours, but is a very good representation of how the ancient people, the Greek philosophers and the ancient Romans thought about health. And basically it represents at its heart, at the heart of health, you have human beings, homo, you have time, annus, and you have the world, which is mundus, and all its creatures. But the major drivers of health, according to them, were ignis, fire, terra, land, aqua, water, and air. And so as we look at where we are now, and as we look at where we are trying to go, I need to show you that things have moved fast in certain moments because there have been some disruptive innovators. And actually, I think that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we were in dire need of some new ideas. I would like to point out that actually this book was written before COVID-19. And so this vision is actually even more adequate and more inspirational now that COVID-19 has happened. But anyway, some major breakthroughs which occurred were, for example, bringing art into science and breaking the silo, and, for example, introducing perspective into anatomy, which revolutionized knowledge because it suddenly made things that were not accessible accessible to everyone. And this was a real transformation, exactly like the transformation of this man here, a Dutchman who discovered the microscope. Anthony van Leeuwenhoek was a textile merchant who was interested in seeing what he could feel with his hands. And he was interested in seeing what velvet looked like and what silk looked like. And so he took the lenses of Galileo and inverted them and created the first microscopes. You can look at his wife as she tolerates this man who is become a serial magnifier, because he will magnify anything that he finds, because he has discovered a completely new world, which is the world beyond what is visible. And so without a camera, without a computer, but with his hands and his memory, he drew thousands and thousands of things that he was seeing that went from sperm to grains of sand to, these were the first protozoa, the first little animals that he saw. And this is a flea. And he opened the doors to a world that did not exist. And he came from a completely different field. The next disruptive innovator I want to talk to you about is Jenner. And this was a few years later, but Jenner did something which was disgusting. It was unacceptable, and it was against any rule of common sense and of decency at the time. He used material from an animal. You see, there's in the original print here, there's a cow, because he used material from cow diseases to inoculate it into small little babies and save them from smallpox. And in fact, look at this cartoon, which was a cartoon of the time. You can see that there are cows coming out of people's nose, of their arm, of their throat, because disruptive innovation is sometimes so disruptive that it is ridiculed. It could be not taken into account, and of course also attacked. The last disruptive innovator I want to talk to you about is Jon Snow, who in the midst of a cholera outbreak figured out that it was water that was carrying cholera, and therefore pulled out a map of the district, found out which was the pump that was providing water to the infected households, and with that map stopped the cholera epidemic because he closed that pump. And nobody had thought about it. Nobody had thought that water could carry a disease. And this brings us back to where we were. We are now in the middle of a pandemic, which is happening. Okay, it is happening. We are measuring it. We are measuring everything of this pandemic, everything. And we have a very big challenge, I think, because this pandemic is highlighting that we are very dependent from what is happening to our animals, from what is happening to our soil, what is happening to our land, that we are very dependent from water and water supplies and what we are doing to our water supplies, but that we are also very dependent on air and on what we breathe, and because that is also part of who we are. And finally, we are dependent on fire, because fire is burning the planet, and heat is warming our planet, and we could be close to a point of non-return. And so I think that actually the big challenge that we have, and that the book talks about, is why don't we take all this data that we have, it exists, and we find an infrastructure to put this data, and why don't we look at it in a truly interdisciplinary manner, breaking the barriers? And this is, I think, a fantastic opportunity to rethink some pathways and basically to embrace really, truly and fully health as a system, to, let's say, co-advancing. This needs to be our objective. We need to co-advance the health of humans, animals, plants, and the environment, and follow the guidelines of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this brings me to my conclusive slides, which is, how can big data transform how we look at health? And it can certainly transform how we look at health significantly, but the first shift we need to make is we need to discuss and debate, and that is why I am very happy that Reyes Tirado is here and Emanuele Bompan is here, because until now, health has concerned one species inhabiting the planet, Homo sapiens. And actually, because Homo sapiens is interconnected and interdependent from the other species and from the environment, maybe we should start developing a circular approach by using all that data that we have and that is just there to be used. A couple of take-home messages on how circular health is fortified and can be applied following the COVID-19 crisis. Well, first of all, this is the moment to push and expand public health measures like washing your hands and influenza vaccination, because this can significantly impact health. We mentioned before that the pandemic has highlighted some fragilities, and we finally have an excuse, a real excuse to embrace sustainability. And at the UF One Health Center of Excellence, together with a group of very motivated researchers and scholars, we are working at a project around exploring new pathways for circular health. Thank you very much. Oops, no, this is what we're doing, but this is another story. So this is another part of the story. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilaria. It was a very, very interesting introduction to the discussion. And, you know, I think 2020, which has been so far a terrible year, definitely has shown us the correlation between health, society, the environment, with direct and indirect correlation. And Dr. Reyes Tirado, you have seen, you have been analyzing this with Greenpeace for many years. You know that when there is a lack of health of nature, that always impacts the economy. It impacts the health of human beings. It impacts even their psychology. There are research out now that proves that a human being living outside the natural environment tend to have more psychological problems than the ones who live in a more natural environment. So what is your assessment of this correlation related with the general health of the planet that we know is not really in a good shape.
Yeah. So let me first start by congratulating Ilaria on the book and on introducing this notion of circular health. I think it is really a great opportunity for us to think about the environment and life and human life, as she says, as totally dependent on nature, and how we can perhaps, using this concept of circular health, bringing it all together. So for many years in Greenpeace and the wider environmental movement, really, we've been talking about the importance of protecting nature and protecting the climate on the planet for biodiversity and for keeping the climate in a safety net for humans. But we're of course now living a health crisis, and this is also a moment for thinking about how health is such an important element in keeping nature also intact and protected. It's about biodiversity, it's about climate, but it is also about avoiding devastating infectious diseases like COVID we're seeing that can have immense impact on public health and on economy, as we see. So in that sense, it is really important for us to see these connections between the nature, the natural world, and the protection of climate as an essential element in keeping public health. Going more into the details around particular examples, we can see how emerging diseases are often linked to this increased contact between wildlife, livestock, and people. And very often, this is due to changes in land use that provoke the destruction of these natural ecosystems. And we know, for example, that COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. It's a disease that is transmitted to humans through animals. And we also know, science knows, that around 70% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonoses. So linked through getting to humans through animals and through this increased contact that often comes from the destruction of nature. We also know that for the last 80 years, about 50% of these zoonoses are associated to changes on agriculture. And of course, we know that also animal farming and the expansion of animal farming is linked to the global destruction of nature and ecosystems. And in the last 50 years or so, it's been studied that around 65% of global land use change and destruction of ecosystems is linked to this expansion. So as Ilaria was saying, what we do to our water, what we do to our air, what we do to our land is directly linked to the health of the planet and directly linked to the health of us humans in it. I want to maybe leave more space for the debate. This is a very wide topic, and yes. So
I just had a quick question.
Yes.
We haven't seen till this day health inside documents, international negotiation agreements that were connecting the environment and the health. If we take the Paris Agreement or the Biodiversity Agreement, there is no mention in it. Do you think it's time to really start to include this concept also at that level of discussion of environmental issue?
Well, if I can answer to that, I think that it's actually quite a paradox that health has not been included as one of the pillars of certain agreements. And actually, just think that there is a rather unique contradiction, which was causing a lot of trouble because the Nagoya Protocol for biodiversity and conservation of genetic material included pathogens. And so paradoxically, in this situation, it didn't happen. But according to the international protocols, they could have not shared that viral sequence. And it's really strange because so the whole Nagoya Protocol, I think, should, of course, cover a whole series of aspects, but it cannot fail on an aspect of sharing information on.
And you've always been at the forefront of this idea of sharing data. I mean, you were one of the first person to share viral information. How key is
that there are contradictions, right? And COVID has suddenly made these contradictions
clear,
obvious to everyone, right? So, you know, that thing needs to be fixed now, because what happened in China could happen anywhere else in the world. And if you have a government that doesn't want to share, it's going to be so much more difficult.
But clearly it's a problem of governance. I mean, as we're seeing even these days, we have all the data we need to face the COVID crisis, but then, you know, you never have the proper governance. No one knows when to act, how. Some people even refuse to act because of ideological issue. So how can we really empower this One Health revolution? I mean, both of you have relation with governor, with the minister. So how the discussions going at the political level? That's a question for both of you.
I think that it has to pass through people. So circular health is not about, it's not something that can be imposed from above. It's something that needs to come from below, because today we have the power of citizen science. Greenpeace is one of the examples of how powerful citizen science is in the pre-digital era, in the digital era, and how much more it will be in the post-COVID era. And so that's why this book is really not so much about science, and it was written for lay people. It was written for lay people to get people to think on what are the new pathways that we need to pursue. And I think that citizen science can be a very, very powerful tool. But I'll pass it on now to Reyes Tirado for if she has any comments.
Yeah, so I think two big elements I think we're learning from all these crises, and for how can we better respond, as Ilaria says on the book, look for these disruptive innovations and that will take us to transformation. So the first one is around what you were mentioning also, people. So listening to people and listening to science. And we have seen, for example, with the climate movement in last years, that youth are coming to the street and are saying to the governments, this is important for us. And we want, you know, a response that is coordinated, that is collaborative, and it is consistent with the problems we're facing. So in that sense, I think listening to science that is telling us if we don't act very quickly, we are putting at risk the safety net of climate and biodiversity that we have on the planet, and we have to act in a way that is global, that is coordinated, and that is consistent. So listening to both people and science is very important. The second element is that, of course, we're seeing also with COVID, we are right now in the middle of a big second wave in many places around the world, also because leaders are not doing enough. They're not acting in a way that is putting us on a safe pathway. And this talks about what we do with the recovery. So we are getting ready to use vast amounts of public money for the recovery of this crisis, both on health and economy. And those funds need to be directed to places where really is going to build this resilience. It means building public health in a way that is consistent. What Ilaria talks about in circular health, One Health, that takes into account planet, including our food system, animals, and humans, but all interconnected. And second, that is not funding the corporations and the industries that are responsible for taking us to the devastating moment we are right now. So we as people need to make those leaders accountable that this is not the response we want. We don't want those public funds to go to the culprits of these multiple crises that we're facing at the moment. And we want that to really disrupt and transform the planet into a more green and just for us and for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. As a, I'm the editor-in-chief of a magazine that specializes on circular economy. So we have been discussing about this concept of, reusing, recycle, using less material, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's important also that the economic sector starts to think as a circular economy, also as a circular health. Therefore, for every action, for every product, they need to measure the environmental impact and the health impact of these things. I mean, right now we have a lot of new legislation about chemical elements in material, about the impact of certain materials on people well-being or psychological well-being. And so I think if we really have to talk about this concept of circular economy, that of course is growing a lot. In Europe, we have to definitely include also this concept of circular health. At the end, Ilaria doesn't really like sometimes definition, and she's right, because we don't have to think, in boundaries. We have to really start to think in a more open way. Am I correct, Ilaria? No, you always been saying we need to break silos.
Yes, and this is one of the amusing things I find of working for many years at the interface between many disciplines. Is the questions that I get is like, but where are the boundaries of circular health? And I really don't understand why we should be still, when we're talking about concepts, we're talking about ideas, we're talking about new ways forward, why do we necessarily have to have some boundaries? Boundaries were boundaries of the past. Something which is circular is circular because it respects balance, and this is something that I think that we really have to regain as a society. So a general sense of balance and of re-equilibrium. We need to remake the equilibrium that is natural. We need it to be more strong, more forceful. And I have to say that the COVID-19 has offered us a unique opportunity, which is that to see what happens if the world stops. So nobody wants the world to stop. Nobody wants the world to go bankrupt. And of course, we are all very worried about the economic ramifications of this catastrophe. However, during the lockdown and as certain activities were implemented, we have seen that in many parts of the world, nature is back. So nature is back actually after a couple of weeks. It's not that asleep, it's not, we have not passed the point of non-return. And so the silver lining that I see in this is that we can approach this circular health in a circular way, and we will have gained 20 years of advantage because we will not have done anything forceful before 20 years, even in Europe. And Europe has a very, very, I think, key role, because on one side there is currently America first, and on the other side there is currently China, in which this whole pandemic emerged, and Europe actually, I think, has an important role even to take leadership on certain aspects.
So talking about Europe, maybe I wanted to introduce also maybe one example of concrete policies that could have implemented the One Health and the circular health approach to policies that then have a direct effect on our health and on the livelihoods of millions of people. So the European Union has been debated last week about the common agriculture policy, and where these funds, which hold a very big part of the total European budget, around 40%, that is directed to an agriculture model that should support our health, on top of protecting environment, creating economic value, and so on. But you know, that policy is usually decided upon from agriculture players. So there is the first opportunity to bring in, and this happened in June, when for the first time it brought in the environmental committee to also have an influence and a decision over these agriculture policies. An opportunity would be to also bring in the health aspect to it. So what we grow in our agriculture lands, how we grow it, and then what we eat is, of course, an integral part of our health. So maybe also bringing in the health sector into those decisions and in those policy making would be crucial for our future health. But unluckily, unfortunately, last week, the EU Parliament had decided to continue with a common agriculture policy that is actually funding a lot of the sectors that are putting our health and environmental health at risk, including funding industrial factory farming. So this is something that we're calling upon from Greenpeace, and we're actually calling for, a start over, bring this CAP policy, this common agriculture policy down, and start over with an approach that is really circular, that will really include all those elements that are so crucial for our future and are so crucial for our health. Ilaria explains very well.
Thank you, Sir Reyes Tirado. We all know Europe as sometimes promises with give very interesting promises with a Green Deal, but then when it comes down to the votes, we know that it's not always the case. Also recently, now they are voting for the recovery fund, and now they're trying to include money and funds for the oil sector, which is definitely not the smartest things to do for a continent that's decided to go down a green pathway. Ilaria, I would like to, you live in the US, I would like to have your perspective from the US, how, we know now it's a complex presidency, but what's your take about what US can do to approach and to develop a circular health inside the government?
Well, the US can do very much, as it always does when it decides to intervene on a policy issue. I think that the culture and the relationship, for example, with food, which is a very important component of circular health, is very different in the United States and in Europe, and actually in Asia, of course. But there is a very different relationship with food. And in Europe, I think that the sustainability efforts are much stronger than what they are just now in the United States. I think that we have a very important election coming up next week, which is going to influence many years to come. So,
not just in the US.
The election is going to be influenced by COVID. So, COVID has had a natural event, and a natural, like a little ball of jelly, has gotten in the way of the US elections, apart from all the rest.
Another, we're pointing this out before, of course, food, but also the way we deal and treat animals. Of course, the COVID was the result of a spillover from wildlife to livestock and then to human. How urgent is actually to put this as one of the first action to approach with a circular perspective? Yes, that's for both of you.
Well, maybe I can talk about the wildlife spillover, and Reyes Tirado can speak about the farmed animals issue. So the spillover from wild animals to humans has happened very many times, and it always happens for the same reasons. And the reasons are that there's a lot of inequality around the world, and there are poor people that live in dirty, ugly, disgusting markets. And these markets are populated with animals that come from all over the place. And that is rule number one to make a disease explode. Get animals that come from different species and different parts of the country in one place. That is how pathogens circulate. And so certainly we are going to have to limit some practices, poaching, for example, and other things. I know that actually maybe Reyes Tirado knows there was an initial proposal by the Chinese authority to close live animal trade. But I don't think that went anywhere. But you know, there needs to be a consensus, and there needs to be international will to do this. So it really doesn't make a difference if only one country does it. We need to apply a more respectful approach to nature and to animals, in fact, to mitigate the risk. And by the way, I wanted to add that these things have happened for centuries and centuries. The real unfortunate circumstances which made COVID-19 explode were the fact that it happened in a large city, the fact that that large city had a very big airport, and the fact that there had been the Chinese New Year in those days. And so many millions of people flew out of the infected area. So it has really been a negative convergence on which tells us encroachment, hygiene, and let's say intercontinental transport. These are the three driving factors that have caused this. So
then we can add mistrust with science and some people inability to manage.
Made it worse. That made it worse. Yeah, I think Reyes wanted to add something.
Yes. So just very quickly, and just outlining a couple of thoughts on this. So one is related to wildlife. And while we know there's a connection there, when we increase the connection and this contact between people and wildlife. And early on the pandemic, we from Greenpeace proposed that maybe this is one of those disruptive moments where we can propose, for example, a global ban on wildlife trade, knowing that this is one of the key elements on keeping the one whole health and human health, secure. Of course, doing this while respecting the rights of indigenous and local communities, many of whom depend on this, local trade of wildlife for livelihood. So while respecting those, but banning the international trade of wildlife that often is related to rich countries and rich societies. The second element is around animal farms and how we're keeping animals in the planet right now. So right now we are about a little less than 8 billion people on the world, and every year we grow around 76 or 77 billion animals for eating animals. So the dimension of the industrial animal farm operation globally is immense. And of course, we also know that COVID is not related, or we don't know that it is related to farm animals, although we've seen also how it can infect mink farms that are kept for and those. But we know others. We know that these big industrial animal operations are breeding grounds for other infections, and they are increasing the risk, both for the way they are kept and also because they drive the insanity of more and more deforestation to grow feed. So in that sense, this is also another disruptive moment where we can reconsider what do we do about animal farming. Can we go to a system that is really about much less meat, but better meat? Meat that is produced in a way that is more respectful of environment, of climate, and also rural communities. You know, in Europe and in Spain, for the last 10 years, we have seen how there's a very big increase in factory farm. At the same time, there is a very big decrease in extensive livestock producing. So we are really damaging rural communities and at the same time increasing animal farming in an industrial way, in a very big way. So is this also an opportunity, one of these transformation moments where we can shape a food system that is really securing our health, both on how we produce food and the food we produce to eat?
Yeah, thank you.
If I can add a few words, I wanted to say that it is a long-term project. What you talk about is a very long-term project, but it is really something we should be discussing, because if it is such a transformational change, you need time and to adapt. And I understand the urgency, and I understand that there are some situations which are more urgent than others, but that's why this moment is such an important moment. As you say, we are at a crossroad. Yeah.
Yeah, it should be helping us to rethink priorities. Ilaria Capua, I want to point out another health issue actually that is getting worrisome, getting more and more worrying. Antimicrobial resistance, which is a growing threat. Not many people are aware of it, but it's becoming all over the world, and it's becoming a serious health issue with a lot of people that are becoming resistant to certain bugs. So what is it exactly? So you can maybe explain to people who don't know what antimicrobial resistance is, and what is the scope of it, and what can be actually do concretely to try to control it and stop it.
Yeah, so antimicrobial resistance is the typical One Health issues that has multiple perspectives, and basically it is a characteristic that some bacteria, let's say, some pathogens develop, and they become resistant to antibiotics, and therefore any treatment that is done to a patient, be it human or animal or plant, with bacteria, can be treated with antibiotics. The problem is that if you use too many antibiotics, the bacteria get smart and they metabolize the molecule. And this actually, Alexander Fleming, who is the discoverer of penicillin and who was awarded the Nobel Prize for it, when he gave his speech, he said you should not abuse of antibiotics, because educated bacteria, can learn to defend themselves, and then it will be a real problem. So we knew that this was going to happen from day one. Let's say extensive use of antibiotics in various populations, and I just, I'm European and you are based in Europe, and in Europe, for example, you can't spray plants with antibiotic. Here in the United States, you can. And so that opens a completely new file on antimicrobial resistance in soil, in water, the microbiome of the tree itself. And so we should, with all the data we have, with all the measuring that we are doing all the time, if we could understand truly how much the use of antibiotics in farm animals impacts the number of cases in humans, in hospitals, but also how is COVID-19 affecting antimicrobial resistance? Because if everybody's washing her hands or his hands 5 times a day, this is inevitably going to reduce the number of infections, because if you keep your hands clean, infections go down. And so that is why COVID-19, I think, is going to create, it's going to destroy a lot of jobs, but it will create even more jobs. And that's why we should be on the forefront of the new ideas behind those jobs.
Well, thank you so much, Ilaria. I think that was a perfect conclusion for this very interesting talk. I want to also, of course, thank Reyes Tirado for being with us today and for our great work with Greenpeace. I encourage everyone who is watching us to read Ilaria's book. Again, Circular Health can be found on the internet, on the best bookstore. It's available in English and as well in Italian for the Italians are actually looking at us. Again, myself, it's Emanuele Bompan. I am really grateful for being a moderator of this chat. And of course, I wish to Ilaria and to Reyes a great evening, and to all of you that are watching us tonight. Thank you. Good evening and good day to everyone.
I wanted to say thank you to the technicians and to Elastica. I mean, like, this for us is like, okay, we switch on, tac, tac, and it happens. And we're even, you know, nervous, irritated if it doesn't happen like this. But this happens because of the work of many people who are actually working really hard, because everybody needs them. So thank you to the platform, Elastica. Thank you for the technical staff. And of course, thank you to Reyes Tirado, to Emanuele Bompan for this lovely interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you, and solidarity on these hard times also to everyone.
To everyone. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.